Namaskar. Welcome to today's program. It's a privilege to host Gandhi Katha, the story of Mahatma Gandhi, by internationally acclaimed speaker on Mahatma Gandhi, Dr. Shobhana Radhakrishna. Mahatma Gandhi had said, "Mera जीवन ही मेरा संदेश है." My life is my message. Mahatma Gandhi's teachings continue to inspire millions across the world. Dr. Shobhana Radhakrishna will be speaking today about Mahatma Gandhi's life and teachings. I would like to thank Dr. Shobhana Radhakrishna for accepting our request in speaking today. I would also like to convey my heartfelt thanks to His Excellency Minister for Foreign and European Affairs of Malta, Mr. Evaris Bartolo, for honoring us with his special message on the occasion. In the 150th birth anniversary year of Mahatma Gandhi, let us rededicate ourselves to follow the path shown by Mahatma Gandhi. Namaskar.
In today's world of macho politics and strong men, it is probably quite easy to conclude that there is no space for Gandhi today, and that believing in Gandhi's principles of non-violence and peace is like believing in fairy tales where people live happily ever after. This is not so. I think Gandhi's values are relevant and important more than ever before. We live in a difficult world where things will get worse unless we do our best. And the strong optimism of Gandhi is definitely an energy that we need. I remember one of his quotes, one of my favorite quotes of Gandhi is, "If I had no sense of humor, I would long ago have committed suicide." And his commitment that however difficult the situation is, we must act to make it better, even if slightly better. He tells us, "An ounce of practice is worth 1,000 words." And an ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching. His commitment to political tolerance and religious pluralism is needed more than ever before in a world where we find it very difficult to live together with so much fanaticism, so much hatred, so much racism, so much blindedness towards others. And here it tells us an eye for an eye ends up making the whole world blind. So, more than ever before, I believe that living by the principles of Mahatma Gandhi is the way forward, not just for the 21st century, but for the future.
Thank you, High Commissioner HE Mr. Rajesh Vaishnavji and HE Mr. Everest Bartolo, Minister for Foreign and European Affairs, Government of Malta, for your kind messages. Namaskar and welcome to the Gandhi Katha, story of Mahatma Gandhi, narrated by me during the commemoration of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, which incidentally is also the 150th birth anniversary of Kasturba Gandhi, his wife. I express my gratitude to the High Commission of India in Malta for hosting the Gandhi Katha amidst these challenging times. To learn from Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of truth, non-violence, and purity of means, his spirituality, his environmental credo, his practices of health and wellness of body, mind, and spirit for coping up and staying safe physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually during and after the coronavirus COVID 19 pandemic, which has affected the entire humanity. On October 2nd, the world celebrates the UN International Day of Nonviolence. And in India, we celebrate the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi as Gandhi Jayanti. The entire world is remembering Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of peace and nonviolence. We have an opportunity to remind the humanity of the efficacy of the messages of Mahatma Gandhi, the father of our nation. I pay my respects to the leading lights of Malta and convey my warm wishes to the Maltese people and the Indian community living there who have joined me online today. Gandhi Katha is based on the ancient Indian oral tradition of Katha or storytelling with hymns and narrations. I have given talks on Gandhi Katha in 94 countries during the commemoration of the 150th birth anniversary of Gandhiji in the past 2 years. In all the countries, people have great reverence and respect for Mahatma Gandhi. Many have been inspired by him to take up the cudgels against injustice through nonviolence. Others have followed his environmental credo, and still others have been deeply touched by his simple spiritual life. The humanism of the world's thought leaders are so deeply reflected in Mahatma Gandhi's teachings. The new generation is eager to understand more about this greatest man of the last century who made such a huge impact on humanity and inspired many world leaders. Gandhiji used to begin and end his day with prayers. These were prayers from all the religions of the world, Sarva Dharma Prarthana. Gandhiji's internal core comprised of the essence of all the religions, one that he had acquired from long study and reflection. The devotional poetry of the saint poets that he had heard, sung, and absorbed since childhood made up a significant part of the life of his soul. He said that ultimately all the religions point to the same truth of compassion, love, forgiveness, and tolerance, and that everyone must study the essence of all the religions in an attitude of perfect reverence and have friendship and respect for the practitioners of different religions and diverse cultures. The ancient scripture from India, the Rig Veda, confirms it saying, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. There is only one truth or true being, and learned persons call it by many names. These verse is reminding us that there are many paths that lead to God. I will begin Gandhi Katha with the Sanskrit prayer Asato Ma Sadgamaya, which asks God to lead us from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. This prayer during these challenging times of coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic is for the well-being and safety of everyone and to live in harmony with Mother Nature. Even after 7 decades after Gandhiji has passed on, in every part of the world, his relevance is felt as strongly as ever before, and his visions and actions are of an enduring significance for all times and places. His approach to life was holistic and cannot be divided into watertight compartments of social, religious, political, public, private, personal life, etc. Gandhiji stands out as the champion not only of political democracy but also of economic and spiritual democracy in today's world. Gandhiji believed that moral degeneration is the root cause of all evils, including conflicts. This explains his lifelong crusade of attainment of moral values such as truthfulness, nonviolence, purity of means, love, self control, forgiveness, friendliness, compassion, mercy, and so on. For Gandhiji, the principle of satyagraha or nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience was by non cooperation with evil through the moral values of love force, truth force, soul force, sacrifice, and self suffering. For him, the consideration for the sufferings of fellow human beings was of paramount importance. His belief and actions that social change for establishing justice and dignity of humans is both less harmful and more sustainable when achieved by nonviolent means are very relevant. His legacy of Satyagraha is widely recognized the world over and seen in many movements for civil rights even till today. Mahatma Gandhi's environmental practices were based on the conservation of natural resources, which were often misused and overused for the sake of development. Gandhiji had warned about the unsustainability on the global scale and had said that greed will be the main reason for the environmental degradation and the ecological crisis. He had predicted this a century ago. Gandhiji was the first environmentalist, much before the world was preoccupied by the concerns for environment and the environmental crisis. And with his stunning premonition and knowledge, he had declared that the earth has enough for man's needs, but not for man's greed. He had also said, the earth, the air, the land, and the water are not an inheritance from our forefathers, but on loan from our children. So we have to hand it over to them as it was handed over to us. Equality for women within the society was a principle Gandhiji passionately believed in. His vision of Sarvodaya, the welfare of all, becomes very relevant in the crisis of internally displaced people and migrants. It may well have been thought about keeping in mind the very basic unit of human organization, a village or a county. His vision of Gram Swaraj, which is self reliant, independent, self governed village built on the premises of sustainable growth, is the need of the hour. According to my understanding, Mahatma Gandhi's life was an epic of faith and endeavor. His faith was in truth, the reality, the ultimate reality of truth, and he endeavored to attain it through non violence throughout his life till the very last breath. Gandhiji's adherence to truth, non-violence, and purity of means has inspired me to give Gandhi Katha so that people can put their hearts into understanding Gandhiji, get inspired to learn from his extraordinary ethical and moral leadership, his simple spiritual life, his activism, his revolutionary thoughts, actions, his lifelong service to humanity against all forms of injustice, and how he continues to inspire people in all the parts of the globe at all times and in all ages. Perhaps the greatest source of strength for Mahatma Gandhi was in his faith in God. Truth was the deepest and the most complete form of God. The faith gave him the constant awareness that he was to be nothing but an instrument in his hands. He was to go wherever he was led. For him, the guidance of God constituted two things. One, he had to walk on the path enlightened by truth that was available to him in whatever measures and form. That was the path on which the greatest teachers of the world had already walked. Two, he had to constantly gaze inwards to find inspiration through self introspection, self examination, and self purification. This he did by repeated questioning, and that question was, Ko aham, who am I? What am I? And what is the real purpose of my life? This question has been asked in our ancient Indian civilization since the past 5,000 years. The answer came to Gandhiji that the real purpose of life was to serve others. The deeper the faith, the greater was the endeavor for Mahatma Gandhi. He said, Truth is God. Satya hi Parmeshwar hai. Faith in truth led Mahatma Gandhi to two other realizations. If God is omnipresent, then truth is omnipresent too. If each human being were an aspect of God, then each person is capable of being truthful. of being good and doing good to others. The second realization was that in spite of all the upheavals in the history of humankind, humanity will only progress in an auspicious direction because truth, that is God, is only interested in the welfare of its creation. His endeavor throughout his life was devoted to the search of that element of truth, to awaken it and to nurture it. This is why he could feel oneness with everyone. For most of us, this realization does not set in easily. But because of this understanding of oneness, Gandhiji had no enemies. He did not want to settle scores with anyone, and he did not want to take any revenge. He merely wanted to extend his love, compassion, and respect to everyone, and that was one of his traits. He respected individuals as individuals, and that is another trait that we see in Gandhiji. Another trait is that he used to remain ever positive. He had faced many challenges, but under all the situations, he used to be remain positive and calm. Romarola, the famous French writer and pacifist who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, wrote the biography of Mahatma Gandhi in 1924. And through that, the Western world came to know about Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhiji had gone to meet him on his way back from the Second Round Table Conference in London in 1931 and spent 5 days with Romarola in Villeneuve in Switzerland, discussing the crisis of civilization. Romarola wrote, and I quote, "This man is so fragile in appearance, is tireless, and fatigue is a word that does not exist in his vocabulary. He could calmly answer for hours without a muscle of face twitching. His mind proceeds through successive experiments into action, and he follows a straight line, but he never stops." The Gandhi Katha hymn in Hindi, which I'll play now, elaborates on Gandhiji's definition of truth as having harmony between thought, word, and deed.
मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू बोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू बोल, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान, मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू बोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू बोल, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर भगवान।
Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy was primarily truth centered. Truth was the first and the foremost principle in Gandhian philosophy. The other two were nonviolence and purity of means. Gandhiji's life was a continuous series of experiments with truth, and that's what he called his autobiography also, My Experiments with Truth. He applied his philosophy to his own life through selfless service and to practical social and political service through his nonviolent civil disobedience campaigns, which he termed as satyagraha. Satyagraha is his first gift to humanity. For Gandhiji, truth is the relative truth of truthfulness in thought, word, and deed, and the absolute truth, the ultimate reality. The ultimate truth is God and morality, the moral laws and code, its basis. Another aspect that gave him strength was the clarity that he had acquired from years of experiments and reflection on the philosophical content of Satyagraha. He was clear that Satyagraha was based on the principle of Advaita, of non duality. If the same essence of soul encompasses all human beings, it would allow a Satyagrahi to become one with the oppressor. Any failure to touch and reach out to the opponent would be a failure of Satyagrahi and not a shortcoming of the philosophy of Satyagraha. Moreover, with the experience that he had had over the years, he had begun to see love as a very powerful and positive force. The challenge before him was to use this force with effect. The bigger the challenge, the more enthused Gandhiji was by it. He realized that untruth, injustice, oppression, and tyranny last only as long as their victims accept them. The moment one learns to say no to untruth and injustice, their edifice collapses immediately. This was true for the political, the economic, and the social order. Mahatma Gandhi is the greatest apostle of peace the world has seen in the recent past. His notion of peace is focused on tolerance, forgiveness, compassion, oneness, respect, truth force, love force, soul force, self suffering, and sacrifice. Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of the first half of the 20th century, had called Mahatma Gandhi as the supreme practical leader for change. And listen in to his voice.
I believe that Gandhi's views were the most enlightened of all the political men in our time. We should strive to do things in his spirit, not to use violence in fighting for our cause, but by non-participation in anything you believe is evil.
Gandhiji was the conscience keeper of humanity. That his ideas will be an inspiration to us both as individuals and as a society is beyond any doubt. He was an epoch maker, one who could sow the seeds for the next generation from the fruits of the previous one. Gandhiji is the most powerful visionary and a practical idealist from the first half of the last century, whose life is a role model for us all. But the effort has to begin from a point where you are standing. That is what made all Mahatma Gandhi's idealist actions practical, and he can be truly called a man of action. But it does not only mean he was very busy. That, of course, he was. What we mean is the action of putting ideas or beliefs into practice more than anything else was the driving force in his life. The answer for Mahatma Gandhi was always found in action. He had said, an ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching. But if you want to understand Gandhiji, you will have to understand him not only with the intellect, but also from the emotional part of you and from acts from his life. Usually, people see him from different perspectives. Some people think of Gandhiji mostly as a political leader, politician, but at the same time, some people think of him as a saint, and there are others who think of Gandhiji as a nation builder. He may be all of these, but I think When we consider Gandhiji, we have to try to find out what is the common stream in all these different aspects of life that you see in his personality. One was the commitment to value, and the second one was efficiency in the kind of work that he did. This is part of his comprehensiveness, and there was a unique mixture of, for example, enthusiasm on one hand and patience on the other. Mahatma Gandhi has made significant and seminal contributions that span across such disciplines such as economics, spirituality, environment, conflict resolution, international peace, civil rights, education, society, politics, and many, many more. At that time, the most harmful and destructive impact on the world was that of imperialism, violence, war, materialism, and the greed for controlling the world. Mahatma Gandhi advised to shun these seven social sins in his speech on October 22, 1925. Politics without principle, wealth without work, commerce without ethics, knowledge without character, pleasure without conscience, science without morality, worship without sacrifice. In my opinion, Mahatma Gandhi's life left the most powerful and strong imprint on the humanity of the world. He had said, "My life is my message." John Haynes Holmes was a pacifist anti-war activist and the founder of American Civil Liberties Union. He had met Gandhiji in London in 1931 and later on in Delhi in 1947. He found Mahatma Gandhi's presence, those bright eyes shining through his spectacles, his voice so clear and yet so gentle, his whole presence so simple and yet so strong. He said, and I quote, "I believe that he is unquestionably the greatest man living in the world today. When I think of Gandhi, I think of Jesus Christ." I will play the Gandhi Katha dhun or hymn in Hindi about Gandhiji's philosophy of truth, non-violence, purity of means that combine together to form
लागे रे लगन लागे रे लगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा वतन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा वतन लागे रे लगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा वतन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा वतन सत्य अहिंसा से सत्याग्रह सीखा सत्य अहिंसा से सत्याग्रह सीखा सर्व प्रकार के भय का मोचन सर्व प्रकार के भय का मोचन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन लागे लगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन
Time magazine had listed out three most important protests over 190 years. The first one was the Boston Tea Party. The second one was the Dandi March or Salt Satyagraha. And the third one was the March of Washington. We can see a common thread. The first and second were against the same company, the East India Company. There is a common thread of non-violence in all three. In 1930, with a pinch of salt, Mahatma Gandhi shook the world. He started out on 12th March from his Sabarmati ashram in Ahmedabad in Gujarat for Dandi seashore with 79 fellow marchers, walked for 24 days, walking 10 miles a day, stopped at 48 villages, gave speeches morning and evening to mobilize people to participate in the salt satyagraha, and covered 241 miles till he reached Dandi seashore on 5th April. In the early hours of the morning on 6th April, when he bent down and picked up a fistful of muddy lump of earth with salt, 100,000 people joined him towards the end of the salt satyagraha, 300,000 people broke the salt law all over India. 1,362 newspapers covered the news worldwide. William Lawrence Shearer, the American journalist, was present during the salt satyagraha, and his graphic reporting brought the incidents to the notice of the world. And the world woke up to the brutality of the British government and the power of non-violence and satyagraha led by Mahatma Gandhi. So he remains as the most powerful global brand ambassador of non-violence, a youth icon for opposing injustice of all kinds, an apostle of peace and non-violence, a man whose values can make the world a better place today. Gandhiji spent the 18 formative years in India, where the seeds of his spirituality were sown. The 3 years that he spent in London to study law gave him an opportunity to meet reformers and thinkers of that time. And he read a lot. And he read about the works of the greatest poets and philosophers of the world, and his vision expanded. He became a barrister in London and also learned about citizenship. He spent 20 years in South Africa as a political leader and social organizer. In 1904, in South Africa, after reading John Ruskin's book, Unto This Last, Barrister Mohandas Gandhi transformed his life overnight and started leading a community life of voluntary poverty, self-control, bread labor, and Sarvodaya, welfare of all. He established 4 ashrams in his lifetime, 2 in South Africa called Phoenix Settlement in 1904 and Tolstoy Farm in 1910, and 2 ashrams in India, Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad in Gujarat in 1917 and the Sevagram Ashram in Wardha in Maharashtra in 1936, where Kasturba Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, along with the ashram community, lived in poverty like the common villagers of India. His ashrams were his ideals of a non-violent face-to-face society for Sarvodaya, the welfare of all, for Swavalamban, self-reliance, for Swachhata, cleanliness, and Seva, service of humanity, and carrying out constructive programs for realizing his vision of village republic or Gram Swaraj. Gandhiji's ashrams had a mingling of political and spiritual aims. It was a practical laboratory for transforming ordinary men and women into extraordinary seekers and satyagrahis, for offering the highest sacrifice in the freedom struggle on one hand, and to get involved in constructive programs to serve the poorest of the poor by establishing their self respect and dignity. Constructive programs were his second gift to humanity. I am happy to inform you that I was born in Gandhiji's last ashram in Sevagram. My father was inspired by Gandhiji since his childhood and joined the non-violent freedom struggle and lived in the Sevagram ashram. Even after Gandhiji passed on in 1948, my parents and all of us have continued to walk on the path Gandhiji has shown not only to our family but to humanity. The life and thoughts of Mahatma Gandhi are intertwined and inseparable. His politics was imbued with his spiritual experiments, and his spirituality was tempered by his vision of a non-violent society, and his constructive program was integral to his politics. The unique practices of Mahatma Gandhi, his control of palate, his fasts, his spinning, his silence, and his prayers, gave him the internal strength, and they were as much a part of his politics as of spiritual life. These practices and experiments were sustained and nurtured by the ashram community, through its own practices, affirmed, modified, and validated Mahatma Gandhi's ideals and practices and continues to do so even till today. This shows the relevance of his practices. Gandhiji carried out his experiments in health and wellness through nature cure, diet control, fasting, hydrotherapy, sunbath, mud packs, and observing silence for one whole day in the ashrams. Our friend and the British Quaker, Sir Horace Alexander, stayed in both the ashrams in India with Gandhiji. He noticed that the bell used to ring 56 times during the day in the ashrams. He said, and I quote, Gandhi had wonderful courtesy and punctuality. I was to learn quickly that he was the slave of watch. He had more to do in every 24 hours than almost any other man. So he had learned how to pack the most into every minute. Yet, he never gave the impression of being hurried and impatient. So Gandhiji is the role model of punctuality, promptness, and discipline, and we can learn from him. He has given three gifts to humanity. The first one is Satyagraha, about which a lot of people know many things but not everything. The second is constructive programs, about which few people know. And the third gift is Ekadasha Vrata, or the 11 observances, about which no one knows really, which were a set of rules for the ashram inmates introduced by Gandhiji for spiritual progress and voluntary self-control. The principle behind these rules is to do unto others what you want others to do unto you. Any rule that is followed for a lifetime becomes an observance. As you all know, observances or vrata give internal strength to those who observe them. Ivan Illich, the Croatian-Austrian philosopher, had come to Sevagram ashram in 1980 and stayed there for a week. Every day, he used to sit in the Bapu Kuti, or the Bapu's cottage, which was made up of bamboo and mud. These were the resources available within 1 kilometer there. And he said, and I quote, "This hut of Mahatma Gandhi demonstrates to the world how the dignity of the common man can be brought up. It is also a symbol of happiness which we can derive from practicing the principles of simplicity, service, and truthfulness." Now I will play the Gandhi Katha Dhun, which explains Gandhiji's philosophy of truth is God. Satya hi Parmeshwar hai.
आँखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, आँखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल। सत्य ही है परमेश्वर बापू का बोल, सत्य ही है परमेश्वर बापू का बोल। उसी परमेश्वर की नित्य कर तू शोध, उसी परमेश्वर की नित्य कर तू शोध। आंखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, आंखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल। ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल।
Though Gandhiji's role and contribution to the political arena are well known, what is less known is his contribution towards health and wellness. Gandhiji was a firm believer in the principle that a healthy mind keeps the body healthy, and he stressed the importance of a healthy lifestyle and positive thinking. His interest in health, hygiene, nutrition, and diseases was as great as his interest in politics. He insisted that adopting preventive measures for diseases was better than treatment. He also said that it was important to focus on cleanliness, a controlled diet, and an exercise regimen, and that it was best to avoid overconsumption of medicines, especially those that were not required. He was also a firm believer of nature cure and conducted experiments related to diet and fasting from a very young age. He always believed that it was important to understand what caused diseases and then remove that very cause, rather than falling ill again and again and then attempting to treat it with excessive medication. Gandhiji was essentially a man of science. He approached problems in a scientific manner. Mahatma Gandhi's message to the world on the vital question of health and well being is very important. To him, the study of this question was part of the service to God and His creation, which was his mission. Knowing to care summed up his life. His message is simple and easy to follow. It encouraged everyone to respect simplicity, voluntary self control, reduce the wants, follow the tradition, cultural practices, the values, follow and the environmental credo, and treat oneself through nature cure for living in harmony with nature. Gandhiji was very interested in health and wellness and remained ever vigilant about his own health as well as of others. He said that our lifestyle should be such that it should not let any disease come anywhere near us, and every person is responsible for looking after his or her body, mind, and spirit impeccably. He advised that in order for keeping physically, mentally, and spiritually healthy, we should have perfect understanding of our bodies, which is made up of the five elements that are found in nature. And that is what has been told to us by our ancient seers and sages of India. And these five elements are air, water, fire, earth, and space. For the wellness of our bodies, the balance and harmony between all these five elements is necessary. For Gandhiji, the outside universe was but a reflection of the inside universe. He repeated time and again that the universe is compressed in the atom. There is not one law for the atom and another for the universe. It was based on his actual spiritual experience that gave him the conviction that the moral principles have no meaning unless they can be made to serve as the guide of conduct in the daily affairs of man. The Sanskrit proverb says, Yatha pinde tatha brahmande. You are the universe within the universe. As with the self, so is the universe. What is going on within you is same as what is going on in the universe. Enveloping ourselves in the rhythms and forms of nature can be transformative and healing. Ayurveda, the ancient healing traditions of India, recommends spending time in nature every day. Doing so allows us to experience the wonderment of this existence with all our senses. Nature allows us to shift our attention beyond the domain of our ego and to recognize that we are inextricably connected to the universe. From the mind body perspective, Gandhiji's standpoint was that health is an optimal integration of body, mind, spirit, soul, and environment. Environment is our extended body. There is a nice Vedic expression from the ancient tradition of India which says, as is the atom, so is the universe. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the universal body, so is the cosmic body. As is the universal mind, so is the cosmic mind. Yoga and meditation integrates all components of health, and Gandhiji was a strong believer in nature cure, Ayurveda, and practiced Ashtanga Yoga as well. His experiments with nature cure were always on himself. He also advised his friends and followers to follow these remedies and treated and cured 30,000 patients through nature cure. Dr. Sherwood Eddy was a leading American Protestant missionary, a prolific writer and an educator, and visited Gandhiji in the Sabarmati ashram in 1929. He wrote that Gandhi's bodily presence is like that of Apostle Paul or Socrates. He impressed us the most childlike, the most transparent, the most lovable of man. His whole character is centered in his unique passion in truth and reality. Very few people know that as a couple, Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi contributed immensely 123 years ago to public health emergencies, treating patients as frontline workers in the service of humanity. During the Second Anglo-Boer War from 1899 to 1902, and in the Zulu uprising of 1906 in South Africa, he served as a stretcher bearer by establishing the Natal Indian Ambulance Corps along with 300 free Indians and 800 Indian indentured labor. In the bubonic plague outbreak in Johannesburg in 1904, he and his wife Kasturba Gandhi rushed to help the Indian indentured labor by quarantining the patients in an empty godown, which they had scrubbed and sanitized thoroughly, and treated some of them through nature cure. Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi returned to India in 1915, and in 1918 there was a worldwide outbreak of the Spanish influenza pandemic. Gandhiji opened up his Sabarmati ashram as a quarantine center and treated and served patients through nature cure, provided simple vegetarian diet to boost immunity and maintain physical distancing. Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi took care of the families of the patients, looked after their physical, mental, and spiritual needs, gave them correct information, and help them to remain positive through prayers, meditation, and chanting, and taking care of each other during the time of the Spanish influenza pandemic. Gandhiji had said on 10th November 1918 that our ancestors could build such tough bodies in the past, but today we are reduced to a state of miserable weakness and are easily infected by noxious germs moving about in the air. There is one and only one really effective way by which we can save ourselves from them even in our present broken state of health. That way is the way of self restraint, Sanyam, and of imposing a limit on our acts, wants, and desires. From 1906 onwards, He had been writing articles on Guide to Diet in his Indian Opinion newspaper in South Africa, which people really liked it. And in August 1942, Gandhiji wrote the book Key to Health, in which he wrote that anyone who observes the rules of health mentioned in this book will find that he has got in it a real key to unlock the gates leading him to health. He will not need to knock at the doors of doctors and vaidyas or the traditional health practitioners from day to day. Today, the world is facing three kinds of crises globally. First is the COVID 19 pandemic. Second is the serious and long drawn financial crisis. And the third is the ecological crisis, which has impacted everyone. We have to look for answers somewhere within ourselves by learning from the life of Mahatma Gandhi, which is so open, so transparent, and there is so much to learn from his life. The lesson the pandemic is teaching us is simple. When one member of the family falls sick, the entire family is affected, and soon the community is affected. The nation is affected, and then other communities in other nations in this globalized world. The well being of one individual has an impact on people on the other side of the globe. This is true of every action of ours. What we eat, what we buy, what we think, and what we do has reverberations and repercussions on all life on earth. It is this anubandha, this interconnectedness, that sustains all life on earth. We are all in this together as one human family, connected as brothers and sisters wherever we may be living, whatever color, creed, religion we may be following. And whether we choose to see it or not, we only have one home, this planet Earth, our Mother Earth. Our ancient sages and seers have always looked upon us as Vishwamanava, global citizen, and said that the world is one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The current COVID 19 pandemic is a wake up call for every country, big or small, rich or poor, developed or developing. It has opened our eyes to the fragility of the existence of humans. We will have to learn with COVID 19 now and in the future as well. Instead of reinventing a new lifestyle, we just have to get inspired from the life of Mahatma Gandhi to make the necessary changes in thought, action, and conduct for coping up physically, mentally, spiritually. And this is the future that the coronavirus COVID 19 pandemic is pointing out to us if we observe carefully. Many lessons are very clear, and some are still unknown, surrounding us in uncertainty. This uncertainty is causing mental stress, anxiety, existential crisis, fear of extinction and death, and the mass psychology of living in depression and grief is pointing out to us this fact in the current pandemic. We are collectively grieving for the loss of our known lifestyle. But if we still return to the normal standard of finding happiness by chasing after money, power, position, lifelong consumerism, then COVID 19 has given the wake up call. This kind of lifestyle of empty consumerism and mass distractions have only increased the difference between the rich and the poor, created the huge carbon footprint, increased the misery of the invisible poor masses, and brought in so much calamity. When a crisis makes you feel stressed, meditation, prayer, chanting relieves the stress response. Fear and anxiety are forms of stress that become exaggerated when events become uncertain. When you feel a loss of control over the situation, and when the stress keeps repeating itself without let up, the thinking mind reacts to all of these conditions. It always has, even in the normal times. But a crisis brings stress into high relief, making it very capable of lowering the immune system of our bodies and causing inflammatory diseases. Decades ago, stress was classified as epidemic of modern life. The Gandhian way of life is the best guide to practicing the coping mechanism that induces relaxation, positive thinking, calmness, inner peace, absence of anxiety, fearlessness, and remaining positive. Therefore, Gandhiji comes across as the greatest healer and the wellness guru who comes free of cost. The Gandhian principles of freedom from fear and care for all is a perfect prescription in the times of the crisis. Gandhiji's emphasis on a healthy lifestyle, positive thinking, empowerment of self care, and care in the community would make perfect sense. I once again take this opportunity to thank the Indian Mission for hosting the Gandhi Katha. My special thanks to all of you who have joined me online today. I will end with the peace benediction in Sanskrit for the universal welfare. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let all be happy. Let all be healthy. Let all experience auspiciousness. Let no one be overwhelmed by grief. Om Peace, Peace, Peace. With Gandhiji's blessings, who had said that peace is the only positive force which will lead us from darkness towards light, I will end with the Gandhi Katha hymn, Shubhamangal Ho. May there be auspicious good. May there be good. May the earth be auspicious. May the sky be auspicious. May every particle on earth be auspicious.